The town of Elmridge had always been the very picture of tranquility. Nestled between rolling hills and surrounded by lush forests, it was the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors, and the biggest concern was whether the local bakery had run out of apple pie. But that was before the murders began. It started innocuously enough. The first victim was a kindly old man named Mr. Henderson, known for his daily walks around Elmridge Park. His body was discovered in the early hours of a crisp autumn morning, lying lifeless on a park bench. His eyes were wide open, filled with terror, and his throat had been savagely slashed. The town was shocked, and the news spread like wildfire. The Elmridge Police Department, ill-prepared for such a gruesome crime, launched an investigation. Detective Sarah Turner, a seasoned officer with a penchant for solving even the most baffling cases, was assigned to lead the inquiry. She arrived in Elmridge with a sense of trepidation, not knowing that the peace she had come to restore would unravel before her eyes. As Detective Turner delved into the murder, she quickly realized that this was not an isolated incident. 2 weeks later, another body was found, this time in a dilapidated barn on the outskirts of town. The victim, a young woman named Emily Jenkins, had been bound, tortured, and left to die a gruesome death. The townsfolk were horrified, and the atmosphere in Elmridge grew heavy with fear. The murderer struck again and again. Each murder was more macabre than the last, each victim subjected to unspeakable horrors. Panic gripped Elmridge, and the once friendly community turned into a landscape of suspicion and paranoia. Neighbors eyed each other with mistrust, and friendships dissolved like mist in the morning sun. Detective Turner worked tirelessly, chasing leads and interviewing witnesses, but the clues were maddeningly elusive. The killer left no fingerprints, no DNA, and no discernible pattern. It was as if there were a phantom, striking from the shadows and then disappearing without a trace. The town held a meeting at Elmride's community center to address the growing panic. The mayor, a portly man named Mayor Higgins, stood at the front, his face a mask of worry. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice trembling, "I know that these are trying times for our beloved Elmridge. But we must remain vigilant and united. We will work closely with Detective Turner and the police to ensure that this madness ends." The townsfolk nodded, but their faces were etched with anxiety. There was a growing sentiment that the killer was among them, hiding in plain sight. The once cordial gatherings at the local diner and the town square became fraught with tension. One evening, as Detective Turner sat in her rented cottage, poring over crime scene photos and witness statements, she received an anonymous letter slipped under her door. It read, "Beware, detective. The killer is closer than you think." She felt a chill run down her spine. It was clear that someone in Elmridge knew more than they were letting on. She couldn't trust anyone, not even her fellow officers. The investigation had become a treacherous maze, and Detective Turner had no choice but to navigate it alone. As the weeks turned into months, the murders continued unabated. The entire town lived in fear, barricading themselves in their homes at night and locking their doors during the day. The once thriving community was now a ghost town, its streets empty and its shops shuttered. One particularly gloomy evening, a raging storm descended upon Elmridge. The wind howled through the streets, and rain poured in torrents. Detective Turner had never felt so alone as she ventured out into the tempestuous night. She knew that the killer would strike again, and she was determined to stop them. She followed a lead to an abandoned, ramshackle house on the outskirts of town. The rain-soaked structure loomed before her like a forsaken relic. With her gun drawn, she cautiously pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The house was a nightmarish tableau of madness. The walls were adorned with grotesque symbols, and in the center of the room was a makeshift altar, surrounded by candles and what appeared to be a blood-stained knife. And there, on the floor, lay the latest victim, mutilated beyond recognition. As Detective Turner surveyed the gruesome scene, a sinister figure emerged from the shadows. It was Mayor Higgins, his eyes vacant and devoid of humanity. He was drenched in blood, his hands trembling as he clutched a knife. "You shouldn't have come here, detective," he whispered, his voice tinged with madness. Before she could react, he lunged at her with the knife, and a harrowing struggle ensued. The rain pounded against the windows as the two grappled, the room filled with the echoes of their desperate battle. Detective Turner's training and determination prevailed, and she managed to subdue the deranged mayor. But as she handcuffed him and called for backup, she couldn't shake the feeling that the horror in Elmridge was far from over. The murders had left an indelible mark on the town, a scar that would never fully heal. Elmridge had become a place of nightmares, and the shadow of its dark past would haunt it for generations to come. As Detective Turner waited for backup to arrive, she studied Mayor Higgins, who now sat in a state of catatonic shock. She couldn't help but wonder how he had become involved in these heinous crimes, and if he was truly the mastermind behind them. The symbols on the walls and the altar in the room hinted at a deeper, more sinister plot. When her fellow officers finally arrived, they took Mayor Higgins into custody. The townsfolk, who had gathered outside, watched with a mix of relief and disbelief as the man they had trusted was led away in handcuffs. As the weeks passed, the investigation unearthed a disturbing cult that had infiltrated Elmridge, manipulating Mayor Higgins into committing the murders as part of their twisted rituals. The cult members were apprehended, but the scars of their reign of terror ran deep. The town slowly began to heal, but the trauma lingered. Elmridge was forever changed, and its residents, though relieved that the nightmare was over, could never fully erase the memories of the gruesome murders that had haunted their once peaceful streets. Detective Turner, too, found it difficult to put the past behind her. She had confronted evil in its most malevolent form and had emerged victorious, but the horrors of Elmridge would forever haunt her dreams. She knew that some scars could never truly heal, and that the darkness that had descended upon the town would forever be etched into its history. As she prepared to leave Elmridge behind, Detective Turner couldn't help but look back one last time at the town that had been both her battleground and her crucible. She knew that she had vanquished the monsters that lurked in the shadows, but she also knew that the true horror of Elmridge would always be the fear that resides in the human heart.